Welcome. Committee of Water Resources and Environment, Subcommittee of Transportation Infrastructure will come to order. This time, I'd like to welcome our newest member, David Jolly from Florida. Welcome to the Subcommittee on Water Resources and Environment. Let's see. We don't have any. Let's take care of it. What do we do? Okay. First, I want to ask unanimous consent that the hearing record be kept open for 30 days after this hearing in order to accept other submissions of written testimony for the hearing record. Hearing no objections, so ordered. I'm going to turn it over to the chairman of the full committee of Transportation and Infrastructure, Congressman Bill Schuster, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and welcome to both Secretary Darcy and General Bostic. Thanks for being here today. First, I wanted to touch on something that happened last week. The Obama administration released a proposed rule that would dramatically expand federal jurisdiction over the waters and wet areas of the United States. This is yet another example of a disturbing pattern of an imperial presidency that seeks to use brute force and executive action while ignoring Congress, unilaterally broadening the scope of the Clean Water Act and the federal government's reach into everyday lives will have adverse effects on all of us. It will impact the nation's economy, threaten jobs, invite costly litigation, restrict the rights of landowners, states, and local governments, and make decisions about their land. This massive federal jurisdiction grab was a subject of failed legislation in the 110th and the 111th Congress. Strong bipartisan opposition prevented those bills from moving forward. Defeated in Congress, now the Obama administration is trying to achieve this federal power expansion through a rulemaking. This proposed rule supposedly aims to clarify which water bodies are subject to federal jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. But I'm extremely concerned there are serious flaws in this process. Twice, the Supreme Court has told the agencies that there are limits to federal jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act and that they had gone too far in asserting their authority. Now the administration has taken those Supreme Court rulings and cherry-picked discrete language from them in an attempt to gain expanded authority over new waters rather than heeding the directive of the court. It is the responsibility of the Congress, not the administration, to define the scope of jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. Regulation of the nation's waters must be done in a manner that responsibly protects the environment without unnecessary and costly expansion of the federal government. We cannot continue to protect our waters without unreasonable and burdensome regulations on our small business, farmers, and families. So again, it's with great concern, and this committee will hold aggressive oversight into seeing what the agencies are up to and stopping them, quite frankly, because as I mentioned, it failed twice in the Democratic-controlled Congress with bipartisan support, and two Supreme Court rulings said that they didn't have the ability to do this. Again, I appreciate the Secretary being here and the General, getting their views and priorities from the agencies. With the Corps of Engineers, what you're doing, you play a valuable role in the nation promoting waterborne transportation and appropriate flood protection. But the message should be clear. America does not properly maintain and modernize its most efficient means of transportation, and this in the end will lose us economic advantage in the global market, so it costs us jobs. The administration, once again, is delivering a proposed budget that cuts necessary investment in the nation's water infrastructure by 20%. It's there's a disconnect between the administration and what we need to do in America. Again, I look forward to hearing from both of you today and look forward to continue to working with you as we face these difficult problems in America in transportation and water. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to welcome Secretary Darcy, Army Corps of Engineers Civil Works, and General Bostic, the Chief Engineer, and his folks behind him that we work closely with. Today, this hearing says about the President's fiscal year 2015 budget, the administration's priorities for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. I'm a strong supporter of the efforts by Congress to control federal spending. But once again, I feel like this is the old movie Groundhog Day for most of us on this committee. Many of the Army Corps of Engineers activities that we're examining today are true investments in America because they provide jobs and simulate an economic return. For nearly 2 centuries, the Civil Works mission of the Corps have contributed to the economic vitality of the nation and improved our quality of life. But like Groundhog Day, this administration has again misprioritized the projects and programs of the Army Corps of Engineers. I believe that Congress and the administration must be supportive of programs that have a proven record of providing economic benefits. The FY 2015 budget request by the administration for the Corps of Engineers is approximately $4.5 billion. This request is less than what was requested in previous budgets and almost 20% less than that was appropriated by this Congress in fiscal year 2014. In 2011, we had some of the worst flooding on record in this country. In 2012, we were struck by several major natural disasters. And in 2015, it is likely an expanded Panama Canal will be operational. Yet, the President has learned little from the recent experiences of coastal storms since his budget proposes investing no funding for construction of shore protection projects nationwide. In addition, he sends to Congress a budget that has an ecosystem restoration construction budget that is 3 times larger than its coastal navigation construction budget. Fiscal year 2014 budget was where we expected to find funds to match the administration's rhetoric on initiatives like the President's Export Initiative or the President's We Can't Wait Initiative. Since the funds are also absent in the fiscal year 2015 budget, perhaps we should call it We're Still Waiting Initiative. Instead, while the President is proposing just over $915 million out of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund for operation and maintenance activities in FY 2015, just last year in FY 2014, it is estimated the administration collected $1.566 billion in the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund in taxes, paid by businesses for the purposes of maintaining America's ports. This will not keep up with the growing demand on our ports to accommodate more and larger ships that will leave the trust fund with almost $10 billion in IOUs in the nation's ports at the end of the next fiscal year. This administration is not the first to shortchange America's water transportation system, but I find it irresponsible for any administration or for Congress itself to not fully spend the tax dollars collected for their intended purposes. We got a little heckling there on the favor side. I know we need to find savings, but savings could be found by slowing down work on some environmental restoration projects until the economy turns around. Instead, the President's budget prioritizes these activities above coastal navigation. The largest coastal navigation expenditure in the construction general account is less than $35 million in the Delaware River area. By comparison, the 3 largest ecosystem project expenditures in the construction general account are for one project for almost $70 million and another project for $65.5 million and one project for almost $50 million. And 2 of these multi-million-dollar ecosystem restoration activities are on the behest of other federal agencies, like the United States Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service. I admire the good work of the Corps of Engineers does related to the environmental restoration, but when our cities and towns are suffering from extraordinary flooding and our farms and our factories are struggling to compete in the global marketplace, I believe we need to focus on missions that protect people and benefit the economy and create jobs. While we in Congress understand the Corps of Engineers has to comply with the Endangered Species Act and other laws, every year the agency has to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on so-called environmental compliance activities at the whim of other federal agencies with no end in sight. I think it's time for the Corps needs to say enough is enough. Budgets are about priorities. A priority of any administration should be to put the United States at a competitive advantage in the world markets. According to this budget, the coastal navigation system the nation has today, which is the same coastal navigation system we had when the President took office, will it be enough to keep the United States competitive when the Panama Canal expansion is complete? Many of us in Congress disagree. While the President's Export Initiative and We Can't Wait Initiative made some promises to the public, unfortunately, many of us in the Congress believe the President's budget does not deliver on these initiatives. Like Groundhog Day, once again, the President overpromises and underdelivers. Lastly, the President's proposed budget for the Corps of Engineers strangles the planning budget for the new projects. The budget proposes a $45 million cut for studying new projects that are requested by local non-federal project sponsors. The planning budget provides a tremendous value to the nation by tailoring solutions to local needs and is a direct link to the Army's planning for warfighting and force protection. By eviscerating and planning the planning budget, the President's budget creates uncertainty for both the Army, Civil Works, and military missions. On top of this budget malpractice, the President last week released a proposed rule that will dramatically extend the reach of the federal government when it comes to regulating ponds, ditches, and other wet areas. This will restrict the rights of landowners, increase compliance costs for those trying to create jobs in this country, stifle investment in those same businesses, and create an imbalance in the state and federal roles in carrying out the goals of the Clean Water Act. I am extremely concerned that this administration is once again trying to do an end around Congress to expand federal power under the Clean Water Act. I look forward to your testimony today, and it's time I will yield my time to my ranking member, Mr. Bishop, for any comments he might care to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you for scheduling this hearing on the Army Corps of Engineers budget for fiscal year 2015. Wish to welcome our two witnesses today and thank them for their service to our country. Before I proceed, I want to personally thank you, Assistant Secretary Darcy, for your support in moving the Hurricane Sandy recovery effort forward. As you know, the storm directly impacted Long Island and many of my constituents. All along the coast, beaches and dunes were obliterated, leaving thousands of people directly exposed to the full force of the Atlantic Ocean and future storms. Because of your leadership, we are now finally headed toward returning sand back to protect these beaches. I look forward to working with the Corps to see these projects through to completion. So, again, I thank you very much. I want to start off with a couple of specific statements about the budget and then conclude with a comment about the recently released draft rule for the waters of the United States. Despite the progress on Sandy, I am very disappointed in the administration's fiscal year 2015 budget request for the Corps. The total funding for the Corps is decreased by almost 17% from fiscal year 2014 appropriated levels, and that is reflected in reductions in funding across the board in the construction, operation and maintenance, navigation, and Mississippi River accounts. It seems to me that we are well beyond the point of doing more with less. Rather, we are now at the point where we have to make difficult and very risky decisions on where we focus the Corps' efforts. From an O&M perspective, this means decisions on which communities and populations are put at risk of increased damage from floods, storm surges, lost navigational ability, and loss of structures. I can appreciate the can-do attitude of the Corps, but we all have to agree that cutting the budget will result in real impacts to the mission and ability of the Corps to do its job. As you are aware, we will hopefully soon conclude conference negotiations on the new Water Resources Development Act. We are confident that we will be able to provide the Corps with improved direction on how we, the Congress, would like the Corps to prioritize its activities, address working with non-federal sponsors, and handle the harbor and inland waterways needs across the country. The latter issue of harbors and the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund is particularly important to me and many other members on both sides of the aisle whose districts depend on harbors. I will be releasing later today a letter to the Committee on Appropriations calling for the full utilization of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund without, and I stress this, without diverting budgetary resources from other Corps construction or operation and maintenance programs. If there is one area that we've had consistent feedback on during the WRDA process, it is that members, constituents, businesses, and communities want harbors and shipping channels into the harbors maintained to authorized widths and depths. But we don't want these maintenance needs to come at the expense of other Corps mission areas and construction projects. We have to find a way to get more money back to the donor harbors and support the needs of small and mid-sized harbors. And I would say to my colleagues on this committee, I'm urging you to join me in signing this letter. This is an area where in our WRDA markup and in previous hearings over the course of the last 4 years on this subject, there has been near unanimity. It has not broken down along party lines. Republicans and Democrats agree that we want more money out of the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, but we do not want it to come at the expense of other accounts within the Corps. So please, I urge you, join me in sending this letters to the appropriators so that we, the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, can speak with one voice on this issue that is important. Let us stop pointing fingers and let us try to be part of the solution. The second area of concern is the decreased funding for both the investigations and the constructions account. The investigations account is being reduced by 36% and the construction account by 32% from fiscal year 14 enacted levels. As you know, in a no-earmark world, the only way projects are being moved forward is by the administration asking for them. In my opinion, the reductions in these two accounts in particular takes away the primary role by which projects are being identified and integrated into the Corps program. My concern is that the Corps is losing critical mass and support in respect to engineers and projects with a budget approach of this sort. Before concluding, I want to briefly address last week's review of the Waters of the United States proposed rule. We've heard a lot of rhetoric about this being a regulatory overreach and regulation by fiat. For the record, when this administration proposed to clarify the scope of the Clean Water Act by a proposed guidance, which is the same manner, that is to say the same manner used by previous administration, certain groups vehemently opposed it and demanded a more formal rulemaking approach. In response to that call, the Corps and the EPA shifted gears, initiating what the public called for, a negotiated public rulemaking, one that has a mandatory public comment period before an agency can proceed further. Not surprisingly, many of the same concerned groups as before are now stating that the government is overstepping its bounds. To be clear, the administration has stepped in only to alleviate the confusion and uncertainty surrounding the scope of the Clean Water Act that was a result of the Supreme Court's decisions in 01 and 06. All parties, including developers, farmers, and resource managers, would benefit from additional clarity on which waters are covered by the Act and which waters are definitively not covered. This rulemaking effort is the response that people asked for. Perhaps better than criticizing the public rulemaking process, we should allow it to move forward and let decisions be made on science and on the feedback received. Let's forget the hyperbole and the vitriolic comments, and let's let the process work. Once again, I thank you, Assistant Secretary Darcy and General Bostic, for your work on behalf of our nation's waters, and I look forward to your testimony. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
If other members have an opening statement, they can submit them for the written record. And at this time, I wanted to turn it over to Secretary Darcy for her opening statements, and if we can try to keep it within 5 minutes or so, because I want to allow plenty of time for members to ask questions. So welcome, Secretary Darcy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and distinguished members of this subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to present the President's budget for the Civil Works Program of the Army Corps of Engineers for fiscal year 2015. I'm Jo Ellen Darcy, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, and I will summarize my statement and ask that my complete statement be included in the record. The budget for FY 2015 for the Civil Works Program provides a fiscally prudent and sound level of federal investment in the nation's water resources. The President's 2015 budget includes $4,561 million in gross discretionary appropriations for the Army Civil Works Program, offset by a $28 million cancellation of unobligated carry-in fiscal year 2015. A total of 9 construction projects, three of them navigation, 4 flood risk management, and 2 aquatic ecosystem projects, 28 studies, and 6 designs are funded to completion in the 15 budget. Completed construction projects will result in immediate benefits to the nation and directly impact many local communities as benefits are realized from the combined federal and non-federal investments. The Civil Works budget includes funding for 1 priority construction new start and 11 new study starts in the investigations account, including the Water Resources Priorities Study, which will build upon and broaden the progress that's being made by the Corps in its North Atlantic Coastal Comprehensive Study, which was funded under the Disaster Relief Appropriations Act. At a funding level of $950 million, the budget provides for the 3rd consecutive year the highest amount ever proposed in a President's budget for work financed through the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund to maintain coastal channels and for related work. The budget funds capital investments in the inland waterways based on the estimated revenues to the Inland Waterways Trust Fund under current law. However, the budget also assumes enactment of the legislative proposals submitted to the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction in 2011, which would reform the laws governing the Inland Waterways Trust Fund. The administration's proposal would generate an estimated $1.1 billion in additional revenue over 10 years from the commercial users of these inland waterways. This amount reflects estimates of future capital investment for navigation on these waterways over the next decade, including an estimate adopted by the Inland Waterways Users Board. The proposal is needed to ensure that the revenue paid by commercial navigation users is sufficient to meet their share of the costs of capital investments in the inland waterways, which would enable a significant increase in funding for such investments in the future. The budget provides $398 million for dam and levee safety activities, including $38 million to continue the Levee Safety Initiative, which involves an assessment of the conditions of our federal levees. In continued support of the President's Veterans Job Corps, the budget includes $4.5 million to continue the Veterans Curation Project, which provides vocational rehabilitation and innovative training for wounded and disabled veterans while achieving historical preservation responsibilities for archaeological collections administered by the Corps of Engineers. In summary, the 2015 budget for the Army Civil Works program is a performance-based budget that supports an appropriate level of funding for continued progress, with emphasis on those water resources investments that will yield high economic, environmental, and safety returns for the nation and its citizens. These investments will contribute to a stronger economy, support waterborne transportation, reduce flood risks to businesses and homes, restore important ecosystems, provide low-cost renewable hydropower, and deliver other benefits to the American people. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, I look forward to working with the committee in order to support the President's budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Darcy. General Bostic, welcome.
Chairman Gibbs, Ranking Member Bishop, Chairman Schuster, and members of the subcommittee. I'm honored to testify before your committee today, along with Secretary of the Army for Civil Works, the Honorable Joe Ellen Darcy, on the President's fiscal year 2015 budget for Civil Works program in the United States Army Corps of Engineers. I've been in command for nearly 2 years now, and I'm extraordinarily proud of our people and the missions they accomplish each and every day. I would like to touch briefly on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers campaign goals. First, we support the warfighter. We continue to work in more than 130 countries using our civil works, military missions, and research and development expertise to support the Army service component and combatant commanders. We often find ourselves at the apex of defense, diplomacy, and development with our work, and as such, the Corps of Engineers supports the national security of the United States. Also within this goal, we are focused on sustainability and energy, as well as our support to our interagency partners such as the Department of State, Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Energy, and many others. Second, transform civil works. I've had the opportunity to speak to many stakeholder groups and elected officials about the state of the nation's water resources infrastructure and its shortfalls. The 4 elements of our civil works transformation strategy will help address some of these issues and make us more efficient and effective. Those elements include modernize the project planning process, enhance the budget development process through a systems-oriented approach and collaboration, evaluate the current and required portfolio of water resources projects through an infrastructure strategy to deliver solutions to water resources challenges, and finally, to improve our methods of delivery to produce and deliver both products and services through water infrastructure and other water resource solutions. Third, we must reduce disaster risks and continue to respond to natural disasters under the National Response Framework, as well as our ongoing efforts with flood risk management. The Sandy recovery work is progressing on schedule. More than 200 projects from Florida to Maine and into Ohio were adversely impacted by the storm. In 2013, the Corps successfully repaired many projects and returned approximately 15 million cubic yards of sand to affected beaches. In 2014, the Corps is on track to remediate the remaining Sandy-impacted beaches, and we expect to place approximately 50 million cubic yards of sand on these beaches. The study team has been working with over 100 regional partners on the comprehensive study. The framework developed in this study looks at vulnerabilities across a large coastline and identifies measures that could be used to mitigate future risk. It will include a full range of possible risk reduction strategies, from structural to non-structural and nature-based features, and it will provide regional partners with methods they can adjust to meet the demands within their specific communities. Fourth, prepare for tomorrow. This is about our people, ensuring we have a pipeline of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics professionals, as well as a talent management plan for their growth and development. We're also focused on research and development efforts that will help solve some of the nation's toughest challenges. One great example is the sea level rise tool, first developed in use for our post-Sandy recovery efforts. The interagency team that developed this tool won the President's Green Government Award last year. The calculator is now being utilized to analyze other vulnerable areas across the nation. We're reviewing our internal operations and processes to ensure that in a time of fiscal uncertainty and challenge, the Army Corps of Engineers is postured for future success. Lastly, we want to help our wounded warriors and soldiers transition into fulfilling civilian careers. I'm proud that last year we had 140 Operation Warfighter interns in the Army Corps of Engineers and assisted 120 wounded warriors in obtaining civilian jobs. Chairman, I ask that you and other members refer to my complete written testimony submitted to the committee for the 15 budget specifics. I thank you for this opportunity and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. At this time, turn it over to Chairman Schuster for any questions he may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gibbs. Secretary Darcy and General Bostic, natural gas obviously has a tremendous opportunity for this nation. In Pennsylvania alone, the Marcellus Shale Formation has produced 2.2 trillion cubic feet of natural gas in 2012, and it's reinvigorating Pennsylvania's economy. Unfortunately, bureaucratic red tape from the Corps of Engineers is preventing much of this production from going on in Pennsylvania and getting to the market. Over a year ago, a single district office of the Corps of Engineers, the Baltimore office, made some new interpretations on how water resources crossing permits for natural gas pipelines were being reviewed in Pennsylvania. The new interpretation is duplicative. It requires duplicative reviews and is significantly delaying the issuance of permits from fewer than 60 days to now several months in some cases. Even worse, it's blatantly unfair to Pennsylvania. You're letting a single Corps office treats Pennsylvania differently than it does other states. I've been told over and over again there's no change. My understanding is the process is very different. Under the current process, the Corps now categorizes virtually all gas pipelines crossing projects as Category 3, requiring Corps review. Under the provision, most pipeline projects were categorized under Category 1, which only required state or DEP from review and approval. Today, over 90% of these pipeline projects are Category 3, causing significant delays, as I said. How can you tell me there's no change in the interpretation? And we continue to hear that from the Baltimore district, but it just to me seems like there's been a significant change, and we believe it's singling out Pennsylvania.
Congressman, the Baltimore district that you referenced, I know within Pennsylvania you have what's called you have a general permit within the state of Pennsylvania with the Corps of Engineers, and we have in the last year or more about 85% of the permits have been done by the state of Pennsylvania. The other 15% are ones that require Corps review. We also, since in the last year, have opened a new Corps district office in Tioga, Pennsylvania, that I think is dealing most specifically with some of these new requests.
Those are nice words, but that's not what we're hearing coming from the producers in Pennsylvania. And we are going to absolutely nail down the numbers that we're getting and present them to you, because again, I disagree that's happening. Even when you look at the pipeline projects that are other states follow the nationwide permit 12. Pennsylvania is treated differently. And I have a chart here that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 states on it, and only Pennsylvania has impacts added for general permitting review. These other 5, 7 states do not. And how come they have water, they have mountains, they have the same situation going on in Pennsylvania? And I've heard over and over, Arkansas, for instance, I talked to folks from Arkansas that are drilling, and they say we don't have a problem. It's just in Pennsylvania, and again, it just seems to me it's coming out of the Baltimore district office. So it's something that, again, my gas producers are telling me over and over again, these things are occurring. And as I said, I've shown a chart here. It's Pennsylvania's in a different category than the rest of these states. It's something we have to get to the bottom to. Again, we are now getting our producers to get the facts, and we want to make sure you come in and you can sit down and you can have your day and refute what they're saying. But again, it's having a significant negative impact in Pennsylvania. And again, it's not fair, and we want to make sure we get this resolved.
We'd be happy to work with you on that, Congressman. I'm not quite sure which other states you're referring to, but some states don't have the same general permit agreement that Pennsylvania does. Some of them are operating, as you mentioned, under the nationwide 12.
Well, it's a 404 general permitting, and it's the nationwide permit 12. Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Ohio, West Virginia, all under those the same provisions, I'm told, and they don't have to go through any of the process Pennsylvania does, or less of a process, I should say, than Pennsylvania. So I got this, I'll provide it to you, but again, we look to follow up, and again, I'm going to bring the experts in from my state that know far more than I do, that can sit down with your folks and and figure this out, because again, this is if Pennsylvania is not allowed to produce, it's going to damage, obviously, Pennsylvania's economy, it's going to damage jobs, it's going to damage the nation. And right now we have an opportunity in the world to make sure we're producing gas and getting our gas overseas so we can stop what Russia's trying to do. And this is one way that we can use it as a lever to stop that. So again, we'll be talking to you, and we'll make sure we provide this to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our witnesses. I want to, before I have a couple questions I want to ask about the Clean Water Act proposed rulemaking, but I just want to put on the record two things. One is that while we're here right now, the House Budget Committee is marking up a resolution, budget resolution, that would cut domestic discretionary spending by $791 billion over the next 10 years from the post-sequestration baseline. Now, that's where the Corps' money comes from, the domestic discretionary account. And it is inconceivable that if we were to ever put into law a $791 billion cut to domestic discretionary spending from post-sequestration levels, that somehow the Corps would be held harmless. It's inconceivable. And so what I'm going to urge all of us to do, both sides of the aisle, is let's not point fingers. Let's not blame the President or the Corps for budget allotments that are insufficient. We all agree they're insufficient, but then turn around and vote for a budget resolution that would make those budget allotments, which are insufficient, look like a day at the beach. It's just not. It's not consistent, it's not helpful, it's not productive. And at the same time, if we're serious about what we've all said, virtually all of us, about the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, then let's sign my letter. Let's sign Congresswoman Hahn's letter. Let's put some pressure on the appropriators to do what we collectively, as a T&I committee, think we should do. I urge us to do that. We've been, I think, a model of nonpartisanship in the way we've approached this issue. Let's continue that by approaching the appropriators with a formal request. End of sermon, I'm sorry. Waters of the United States. The import of the Swank and Rapanos rulings, as I understand it, is that in order for a water to be regulated under the Clean Water Act, that body of water had to maintain a nexus to a navigable body of water. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And is it correct that the proposed rulemaking that the Corps and the EPA released lives entirely within that definition?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
It also provides a definition of significant nexus that's out there for public comment.
Okay. Thank you. Is there any body of water that was not regulated by the Clean Water Act in the 30 years that the Act existed, pre-Rapanos, pre-Swank, that is would now be subject to Clean Water Act regulation based on the new proposed rule?
No, Congressman.
Thank you. And the whole notion of rulemaking is one that has routinely been engaged in to define the Act. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir. Also, in response to Rapanos, in that decision, it was requested that the agencies do a rulemaking in order to clarify.
Okay. And the rule, is it correct that the existing exemption for prior converted farmland and the existing exemption for wastewater treatment systems, those exemptions were created by rulemaking? Is that correct?
That's correct.
Not legislation?
That's correct.
Okay. Do the existing farmland exemptions that existed in Clean Water Act and in effect have been protected by Swank and Rapanos, do those exemptions remain within the proposed rulemaking that you're putting forward?
Yes, they do, for farming, silviculture, and ranching.
Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Okay, thank you. Secretary Darcy, Well, first of all, I want to make a statement, talk about prioritizing spending. And the President's budget, as my opening statement, has talked about how much is going for eco restoration and not for the construction projects. And in regard to American members' comment about baseline spending and post-sequester, I don't want anybody to get the idea that there's less money from previous years in the total budget apparatus that's being set up because it's baseline. It's after sequester now. We're past the cuts. It's actually still growing funds, just not getting. It's not proposing as much growth as what proposed under the baseline. Secretary Darcy, the 10 largest ports that were authorized today. If Congress were to enact the President's budget, of those 10 largest ports, how many of them would be at their authorized dimensions by the end of fiscal year 2015? Well, first of all, how many aren't, or out of 10, how many are not at the authorized, and how many would be if we enacted this budget?
This budget plans for the operation and maintenance dredging for about 59 of the highest use commercial harbors in the country. However, they would not be fully dredged to their authorized width and depth. Perhaps, I think it's 1/3 of the time they would be.
Right. They're dredged to half their authorized width, 1/3 of the time.
A third of the time?
1/3 of the time they're dredged half their authorized width.
But of the 10, I think that's counting all the 59 largest, but the 10 largest ports, the economic ones, how many of those are at their depths, required depths now? Do we know?
I don't know that. We'd have to.
I think it's probably 2, but I'm just kind of guessing.
Well,
Some of those are naturally.
What's that?
Some of those are probably naturally dredged to that depth,
but I'm not getting. I guess I'm not hearing that if we enact the President's budget that we're going to, those 10 largest ports for important our exports, our economy, will be there at the depths they need to be, especially with the Panama Canal coming online.
Congressman, we'll get you that list of the 10 and what they would be.
Next question, Secretary Darcy. You talk about the President's budget for the second time proposes an $80 million fee for vessels on the inland waterway system. And you mentioned that in your opening statement, but you didn't say where the $80 million is coming from other than the vessels. So mechanically, is it lock fees or what is it?
It would be a user fee for the each of the. It wouldn't be a lockage fee. That was something that was contemplated a while back. This would be a user fee, and it's still the exact specifics are still developmental, but it would be a user fee on the transport through the lock by the particular vessel.
Okay. On the regarding to the Clean Water Act and the proposed rule, I know there's going to be a 90-day comment period. What other things are scheduled and remaining steps in the rulemaking process? What? As you mentioned, there's a 90-day public comment period. After that public comment period is concluded, then the agencies will address those public comment periods before any rule is final. We're also currently awaiting the EPA Science Advisory Board recommendations. Well, okay, that's what I wanted to get to. I'm glad you brought that up because that's my next question about the science report. And we talk about the need for this to bring clarity, and it seems like to me the Corps and the EPA kind of got the cart ahead of the horse here because the science reports, the assessment's not done, and you already put out the rule for comment. Wouldn't it make sense to see what the connectivity report, science report says first?
Congressman, the connectivity report science report is out there as well. It's currently being reviewed by the Science Advisory Board, which is made up of a number of professionals in related areas because science report was produced within EPA, and then now it's being reviewed by the Science Advisory Board. But we put it out at the same time that we will not finalize a rule until the connectivity report has been concluded and the results prepared by the Science Advisory Board.
And I know you already answered questions about possible exemptions, agricultural exemptions, and others. When I look at the rule, I get nervous because you talk about some things that we looked at case by case. You talk about the nexus issue and tributaries. You can redefine tributaries. I think some people could interpret it that it's possible that ditches could be included in this. And I've had some farmers already ask me, how about if they're crossing with their equipment, say 28% nitrogen fertilizer across a swale, Would that become under regulations? I see this mission creep, but I'm really concerned about that.
Congressman, when we proposed the rule last week, at the same time, we also published an interpretive rule with EPA. And also, we, the Army Corps of Engineers, entered into a memorandum of understanding with U.S. Department of Agriculture and EPA in order to make it clear what was exempt. And we went to the silviculture farming and ranching practices that I mentioned earlier, in addition to those farming practices that have come on board since the passage of the Clean Water Act that are now considered existing farming practices. Some of them help to improve conservation, some of them help to improve water quality, and we have a list of those 52, I think it's 53 practices that would continue to be exempt.
Okay, my time has expired, but we'll do another round. Got more questions, but Ms. Edwards. Yeah, we move pretty quick here.
Thank you. I didn't think I was next. I thought I just arrived, so I apologize. Right. Well, thank you very much. I just have one potential concern with the proposed rule that the EPA and Army Corps are bringing certainty to various sectors of our economy that's been asking EPA for a rule to address the regulatory status. But the proposal is very important, as you know, to the state of Maryland, since we have the 4th longest coastline in the continental United States. I think people find that hard to believe given how small our state is. The Chesapeake Bay and several of its tributaries, including the Anacostia, which runs through my district, the Potomac and Severn rivers that all flow through the 4th Congressional District. And the shoreline of the Chesapeake and its tidal tributaries actually stretch over 2,000 miles with thousands of miles of streams, rivers, and acres of wetlands. So I wonder if you could tell me about the proposals that you have in terms of the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay for protection of health and the health of the watershed. And also, if you could talk to me about the progress of the projects along the Anacostia River. There have been several proposals over a period of time, and it feels like if we could just really jump in there, we have some great potential with also restoring the Anacostia.
I'll start with the Chesapeake Bay. We have, as you know, the Chesapeake Bay is one of the ecosystem of national significance that we've been looking at in addition to all of our other federal partners. Our current expenditure for Chesapeake Bay, I'm looking at my staff behind me. I don't have at the tip of my fingers what it is for, but I will get that to you before we leave here for that Chesapeake Bay restoration. I know we're doing oyster restoration in the bay.
Right.
I think that was budgeted at $5 million, but I have to check that. And it's been very successful throughout the bay. Actually, I was able to see how some of it was being implemented in our Norfolk district in that very southern part of the coastline. As far as the Anacostia River, we have undertaken a comprehensive study with a number of, especially the local communities, the city of Washington as well as Montgomery County and Howard County, in putting together an Anacostia study for restoration of that river
Prince
as well.
George's County too, right?
Yes. Yeah, I used to live in Maryland. I'm trying to go up the coast. That has been very successful. And part of that was a combination of not only the Corps study, but each of the local communities looking at what it is they could do within their own authorities as far as restoration and cleanup, including things like stormwater runoff or different kinds of conservation as well as recycling in each of those jurisdictions. So that has been a very... this study was actually in 15. In the 15 budget, we've funded this particular study to completion, so it should be finished in 15.
And so then how, after the study's completed, I guess the people who live along those, along the rivers and particularly the Anacostia wonder, after the study's completed, and this has been a long process for them, then what and how soon?
After the study is completed, I believe that what will happen is that the recommendations in the study, which have all been sort of agreed to within the communities, the implementation is what's going to happen next. And it's going to be, whether it's project specific for a city or whether it's a county, that will all have to be, if a particular project is recommended within there, we'd find cost share sponsors in order to move forward with those, what those are. But I don't have the specifics of what those projects are, but I can provide those to you for
We
the
should
record.
maybe follow up with that. And then lastly, I wonder, although it's not in my district, it's of great concern to all Marylanders, and that is what is happening with the Baltimore Harbor and the operations and maintenance work that's going on there. And if you could describe that a bit and give us a sense of the progress and then the budget allocation, which is increased this year, I understand.
I think our O&M budget for Baltimore did increase this year, and I'm going to ask Amy to get you the exact number.
And how is budget's increased, what's the progress?
In the Baltimore Harbor, I think we've had significant progress there. It's one of our showcase ports on the East Coast because it's a 50-foot port. It's a 50-foot depth already. There's lots of competition for additional depths in other places, but Baltimore's already at 50, so that's a good news story.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Secretary Darcy and General Bostic for being here today. Secretary Darcy, I represent the 1st District of Arkansas, and we refer to it as the East Coast of Arkansas. I have about 600 plus river miles of the Mississippi River, among other rivers in the district. And as you know, the shallow draft ports located on the Mississippi River, they don't receive adequate funds for dredging. In order for us to have a successful river system, it's critical that all those ports are in working order. We consider those ports the on-ramp to the superhighway that is the Mississippi River. And I commend you for including the dredging projects in your work plan for this year. I've been working with many of my colleagues to ensure that the current word of bill contains a mechanism so that Congress can provide regular funding to dredge those additional ports. Madam Secretary, with the important role that these ports play in our country's economy, what's the reason the administration has not made their maintenance a higher priority in their budget?
Congressman, when we do the budgeting for the operation and maintenance of our ports and inland waterways, we focus on the highest commercial use, and those are the ones that we referenced earlier. So the lower use ports don't get as much as the ports that have higher commercial use.
I would only offer, Congressman, that we try to balance it. We talked about the top 59 carrying 90% of the cargo, and of all of the money that's allocated, 70% of the money goes to those top 59 that carry 90%, and we don't give them 90%, which one might think is parallel in terms of the amount we would offer, so that we can provide funds to the moderate and low commercial use ports. So it's not an even in terms of the percentage of what they provide, but it's an understanding that we do have to do exactly as you say.
Thank you. Yield back.
Mr. Garamendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This hearing started out with a discussion on the overall budget. The ranking member, Mr. Bishop, correctly pointed out that this is a problem that we've created. This House and the Senate have put together the sequestration, and the proposed budget that is now before the House from the majority party is an extraordinary decrease in the discretionary funds, which will have a direct impact on what the Army Corps of Engineers is able to do within the United States. And so we should be paying very, very close attention to what we, the House of Representatives and the Senate, are doing to the Corps projects. Having said that, I do want to focus on a couple of other issues that are there. First of all, I want to thank Ms. Darcy and General for the work that you're doing on trying to push forward projects very quickly. Your 3x3 is actually working. We see it in our area, in the Sacramento Valley, projects that once took years, I mean multiple years, decades, are now being moved forward very quickly. I hope you continue that work. You can comment, if you would, at the end of my discussion here. Also, I want to thank you for the ecosystem restoration projects, which are more than ecosystem. These are actual construction projects that are life-saving. The Hamilton City project is one that is now underway. It's ecosystem in that it sets back the Sacramento River levee, creating habitat and flood protection for a small community, Hamilton City. Thank you very much for pushing that forward under the ecosystem umbrella. Also, the Yuba River project is an ecosystem project. It's extremely important, and again, it is on your agenda, and I thank the Corps and Ms. Darcy for having pushed that forward. There are other things that are going on, all good. The Corps is able to move projects forward. The Sutter Buttes project, 40 miles of levee improvement, perhaps as many as 150, 200,000 people will be safer as that project moves forward, and I thank you for moving that forward. The Natomas project, perhaps the most dangerous city, Sacramento, after New Orleans, and maybe now the most dangerous. You've moved that project forward. We thank you for that. There are other things that are out there, and I'd like to call the attention of the committee to an issue that we dealt with in the 1990s for all of the recreation programs that are conducted by the federal government, the national parks, the Bureau of Reclamation, Fish and Wildlife Service. All of these agencies provide significant recreational opportunities for Americans and visitors from overseas. In the 1990s, we allowed those organizations to use the fees collected at the recreation sites to enhance the recreation opportunities and visitor opportunities for everything national parks, refuges, and the like. Somehow we left out the Corps of Engineers. And the Corps of Engineers' recreation fees go back to the general fund. And then we have to appropriate money for enhancements of the recreational programs that the Corps of Engineers runs. We ought to do away with that. We ought to let the Corps keep the recreation fees, avoiding the appropriation process, which starves the Corps of Engineers recreation programs. I think this is something in all of our districts we should pay attention to. Now, I don't know why I was there in the 1990s. I was at the department and I wasn't really paying attention to the Corps, I suppose, and it got left out. All in all, I want to compliment the Corps for moving forward. We'll take up the waters of the U.S. at another hearing, but right now you've done well by my district, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Mr. Webster.
Yield back my time.
Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Darcy, if a port wants to do a deepening project on their own under Section 204 of WRDA from 1986, and then have the Corps take the responsibility of maintenance and operation, how does the Corps define prior to construction? Is it when contract's advertised, or is it when the contract's awarded, or is it when the dredge actually drops a bucket into the water?
Awarded. When the contract is awarded, sir.
What types of determinations does the Corps have to make prior to agreeing to assume that operation and maintenance responsibilities of a locally constructed navigation project?
In order to assume the maintenance?
Yes.
We just have to assure that the project has been developed and constructed according to the Corps' regulations, and after that, the O&M under the 204 would be a request for that 204 has to come to my office, and then the O&M would be granted.
I have one other question. Well, I see Ms. Frankel here, so I'll ask about the Jacksonville Port in Florida. There's a deepening study that's being done. Could you give me the progress on that and possibly what the current timeline looks like?
For Jacksonville, for
Yes.
Port Harbor, it has already gone through the Civil Works Review Board, which is one of the last steps it goes to before it has to go to the Chief of Engineers for final signature. And I believe Jacksport is on schedule for this month. Yeah,
Right.
this month.
General,
Right, ma'am.
could you elaborate on that? Is that true?
We've got some more interagency work to do, Congressman, but we believe by the end of this month we'll have it up to my office, and assuming everything is straight, we'll sign it. But by the time it reaches my office, it's in pretty good shape.
Okay, thank you very much. Yield back.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have 4 questions that I'd like to submit to get the answers at a later time because I've got to run to another meeting. But let me thank the Corps of Engineers for the representation today. With the continued drought throughout the western United States, it is more important than ever that the federal water agencies work together to assist states and local communities in addressing their needs. And it is equally important that federal water agencies ensure that they're doing all that they can to enhance the resources within their authorities. And I do appreciate the efforts that the Corps has made in collaborating with the USDA and Department of Labor and other federal agencies to address these needs. But we've worked collaboratively in Texas for a long time to achieve some of this. But I do understand that the Corps of Engineers stores more than 10 million acre-feet of water for municipal and industrial water supply behind the multi-purpose reservoirs it operates and maintains. And this is enough to meet the annual needs of 6.8 million households. A majority of the municipal and industrial water supply storage is located in reservoirs kind of throughout the southwestern U.S. And I have 4 questions that I'd like you to get the answers to me later. One, some of your plans for working with these local communities and how these multi-purpose reservoirs west of the Mississippi that is more than 1 million acres of feet to make sure this water is available. Right now, it appears that it is not being made available, and I'd like to know, what the plan is to make this water available to these local communities. And I will submit these questions and would like to receive an answer within the next 3 weeks. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Darcy and General Bostic, for being here today. I have a couple questions on a few different issues. Number one, I just want to give you a fair warning when you come back to this committee. I just talked about this subject with your St. Louis district, and it's a design flaw in Lock and Dam 27 Melprice project that's causing some damage to the Wood River levee system. And as you know, our locals have put up their share of the funding to be able to upgrade their levees throughout the Metro East area to ensure that FEMA will, again, accredit those levees at a certain level so that our cost to taxpayers do not continue to rise. I have some concerns as this project moves forward with the estimated costs that it's going to take to fix that problem that's been caused by that design flaw. So I won't have you address it today, but it's something that I will be asking about in the future as you get more information, and I appreciate the info that the St. Louis district's given me. Also, as you're aware, there's an issue with the locals in regards to project labor agreements, which are in the locals provision that provided for the funding for their cost share, and I know that the St. Louis district is working with you to address that problem too, and I'd like continued cooperation and communication on that issue too. But I want to change directions here a little bit. The President's budget requests $29 million for construction projects to halt the spread of Asian carp. I know in my district along the Mississippi River in central and southwestern Illinois. We have some innovative ways to deal with Asian carp, but I see that we already have demonstration barriers to keep the Asian carp out of our Great Lakes, and noting how they've already been constructed and how they're operating, what's this $29 million funding request for?
The $29 million is for not only the continued operation of the barriers, but to also complete the construction of the permanent barrier. We had a temporary barrier 1, then we have barrier 2A and 2B, and I believe that's for the final construction for the permanent barrier 1. Is that right? Am I right, General?
Yeah.
Sure. The specifics are about $12 million for barrier 1, and then another $5 million almost for the backup generators that keep the barriers operational, electrical-wise, and then O&M for the barriers is about $12 million.
Okay, and what are the annual O&M costs of these projects once complete?
I don't have that figure, but we can provide it to you.
Okay. I'd like to submit a copy of a letter that I, along with the rest of my delegation in Illinois and Indiana, signed. It's on the GLMRIS study. It looked at 8 options to control the spread of Asian carp. And I want to note our concern with the recommendations in the study that involves some sort of hydrologic separation because of economic impacts. I'd ask unanimous consent, Chairman, to submit this letter into the record. And I would like to ask either General Bostic or Secretary Darcy, what do you plan to do with the GLMRIS report?
Congressman, as you noted, the GLMRIS report came up with some alternatives for, we were tasked through the MAP 21 legislation to do an analysis of how aquatic nuisance species are transferred between the Mississippi River and the Great Lakes. In looking at that, we identified what invasive species were the most risk for that transfer between the 2 basins, and we looked at alternatives for trying to combat that transfer of the species. We came up with 8 alternatives, ranging from a no-action alternative to doing best practices to all the way to hydrologic separation. All of those alternatives have been the subject of over 7 public hearings over the month of January and half of February. The public comment period on that has closed as of the 31st of March. We intend now to take those public comments, review them, and the next step will be to look at what it is there might be some consensus on. You may be aware that the Great Lakes Commission is looking at this issue, as well as the Upper Mississippi, looking at what there might be a consensus on as to how we would move forward in trying to combat this invasive species.
Thank you very much. I do want to commend the Corps, too, on, I see that the Veterans Curation Project is getting $4.5 million. We share a common goal to make sure that our veterans get employment when they return home. As a matter of fact, the House, in a bipartisan way, passed the Hire More Heroes Act that I introduced just last week, and I see that Senator Blunt has taken that cause up in the Senate, so I hope we can see some movement there. This important program helps put our veterans back to work, and I want to note that 124 veterans have been trained and employed through the program in the St. Louis District Center. And I have one last question for you. How can we leverage some existing dollars to get even more veterans trained through this program?
I think part of the success of the program is going to be we're going to see the leverage in the fact that these veterans are out in the private sector as well as in government working with the skills that these skills they've achieved in 6 months. Whether it's learning how to digitize, learning how to operate camera equipment in order to do this kind of thing. I think that's where we can leverage it, is getting once the public sector realizes what value they bring, and also this program, which it was a brainchild of one of our great employees in the St. Louis district. So,
well, great. Well, thank you very much. I don't have any time to yield back to the chairman.
Yeah, so ordered for the document to put in the report. And I believe your answer of the O&M is about $12 million. Ms. Frankel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to associate myself with Mr. Garamendi, and first of all, to just thank you all. I have enjoyed working with the Army Corps in South Florida, and I don't think the public really understands how important your work is. This is about job creation and protection of our natural resources, and I know it's a difficult assignment, and I have a feeling you would have preferred to come here with a much more robust budget. A couple issues that I'd like to just talk about with you, which pertains, like many of my colleagues, I'll be a little parochial. I talk about South Florida, although I think it'll pertain nationwide, what I'm saying. First of all, in terms of the construction projects in the harbors and the dredging and trying to keep up with now these larger ships that are going to be on our seas and having the harbors to be able to accept these ships, it means, and with the global competition, means really literally across the country. I know in South Florida, all through Florida, North Florida, West Coast, thousands of more jobs and a huge economic impact. So a little concerning to me that that construction budget as it for those kind of projects is down significantly. Also on the shore protection, it's funny in Florida. I think as a I used to visit Florida when I was a kid, and I used to think of the beaches as just a place to get a sunburn. But I have learned very quickly that it's about protecting properties. It's about a venue for natural habitat and a huge economic generator for tourism. And I see that the shore budget is down hugely from $130 million in last year's budget to now $26 million, and the $130 doesn't even include the Sandy money. So that's very painful for those districts that rely on, especially on tourism and the shore protection for the property values. And the last issue I wanted to mention was our very precious Everglades in Florida, which is a natural ecosystem that was actually damaged by man. And it is not only the water system for millions of Floridians, which goes, of course, to our life. It's a natural habitat. It's for a multitude of species and a huge economic generator also because of tourism. And that funding seems to be on a drift downwards. Almost half, the $75 million is less than half of what was in the budget 2 years ago. So I'll just ask you one question. If you could just address each of those issues, from your perspective.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We'll start with the Everglades first. The Everglades budget, as you say, it is less than it has been in the last couple of years. However, we are funding everything that we are capable of delivering in the 15 budget in the Everglades. We were fortunate during the ERA money to get some ERA money for Everglades projects, which helped us begin construction. At the moment, we're looking at there's also some authorizations in the WRDA bill that are going to help to help us with the financing of some of the crediting provisions in WRDA projects. So in the Everglades projects. So I think all of that is a positive lean forward. We've broken ground on 4 projects in the last 4 years in the Everglades. So we're pretty excited about how this is the largest restoration effort in the world is progressing.
You just talk about the shore protection money.
The shore protection money, you did reference Sandy. A lot of the shore protection money, we were able to use Sandy supplemental for impacts from that storm. So that was one of the reasons it was down. But also at this stage, most of the renourishments are being funded. And some of them are being funded with carryover money. That's the reason that most of the beach renourishment number is down.
Okay, thank you for sharing that with me and the panel, and I thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank each of you for your testimony here today. Ms. Darcy, I wanted to start with you. Twice the Supreme Court has made decisions, one with the SWANCC case and the other with the Rapanos decision, and they've told agencies that there's a limit to the federal jurisdiction under the Clean Water Act. And that they've gone too far in asserting their authority. At least that's what those decisions would indicate. Therefore, to be consistent with the Supreme Court decisions, any new rule would necessarily have to leave some of that to the state regulations, and some of the waters previously regulated by the federal government would be regulated by the state. So my question to you is what waters that were previously regulated by the federal government prior to the Rapanos decision are definitely no longer under federal government jurisdiction? To your knowledge, is there any that have been relegated to the state?
No, sir.
So we have two Supreme Court decisions in terms of jurisdiction, and really that has had no effect from a rulemaking standpoint at this point, to your knowledge?
Sir, the Swank decision, as well as the Rapanos decision, in particular the Rapanos decision, requested that the agencies, EPA and the Corps of Engineers, do a rulemaking in order to make clear what the determinations and what was jurisdictional, what was in, what was out. And that's what we're attempting to do in this rule.
So in your rulemaking, with that new rulemaking, what would be excluded from federal jurisdiction and passed over to the state? Is it defined enough where there is no, or will it be defined where there is no ambiguity in terms of what is federal and what is state?
We're hoping that's what this rule will clarify. But it is, there also, all of the exemptions that exist in the Clean Water Act will continue to exist even if this rule goes final.
Well, but that therein is the problem. We now have two Supreme Court rulings that have taken place because of the ambiguity thereof. And so I guess with this new rulemaking, what can the states say, okay, this is definitely our jurisdiction, and where do the feds say that it's no longer their jurisdiction, or is it still going to be a gray, murky area?
I don't believe it will be a gray, murky area. I mean, the Clean Water Act, for purposes of getting a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers, is a federal Department of the Army permit that would be required.
Yeah, I've applied for them. I'm very familiar with those. I've worked with the Army Corps for a number of years, and so that therein is the problem. Is where does that jurisdiction? Because what I have found is that many times, whether it's the EPA or the Army Corps, they have a broad scope in terms of where their jurisdiction will be, and it many times overlaps with agencies in the state, and so there's competing areas of jurisdiction. So how are you going to help us clarify that so we have the efficiency within the federal government, and so that people that are applying for permits know that they go to you for this and they go to the state for something else?
Well, I'm hoping that through the public comment period, we will be able to clarify that if it's not clear.
Well, assuming that the public doesn't know it as well as you do, what would your recommendation be?
For
defining that line so that we know. I mean, you're familiar with the two Supreme Court cases, yes. I can tell the way that you've talked. So how would you better define that to comply with those decisions, where you separate that jurisdiction between federal and state?
Well, Congressman, for purposes of again, an Army permit, that would be the federal jurisdiction over that water because of the dredge and fill requirements.
But according to them, that authority has gone too far. The asserting their authority has, quote, gone too far. So
I think the authority that, and if I may, that is being referenced would be the authority to regulate a particular kind of water,
right?
Not necessarily the state's authority to do so.
So what waters would you not regulate anymore as a result of those two Supreme Court cases?
This proposed rule would continue to regulate those waters that have already been part of the federal regulation.
So you wouldn't relinquish control over anything?
Well, it would depend as to how other waters is eventually defined. That's one of the areas, one of the 7 areas within this proposed rule that we're seeking public comment on in order to make a determination about what other waters would be jurisdictional under the Clean Water Act.
We'll submit a few other questions for the record. I appreciate the chair's indulgence.
Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Secretary Darcy, thank you and your staff for meeting with me, listening to my constituents, and funding really critical projects in my district. On behalf of the thousands of people and businesses that are going to be helped by that, I thank you. My question today is about delays. In the Word bill, the House version, we set a maximum of 3 years to complete various studies. And as you know, the Rio de Flag project is coming up on a 6th-year anniversary, waiting for the updated limited reevaluation report. Do you have a status update on where we are with that? And then just would like to know your thoughts about how we protect against future delays in chief's reports and updated economics.
I have some information on the Clay Avenue washed detention basin. Is that
yes.
the piece of Rio de Flag?
Yes.
We have that the contractor will be mobilizing this spring, and we anticipate construction completion in the fall of 2014.
Okay, that's good news. Thank you. Any thoughts about how we can prevent future delays to chief's reports, either one of you?
One of the things I would offer is we've taken a real broad look at our portfolio of feasibility studies, and when we started this about 2 years ago, we had about 600. We have that number down to about 160, and we've looked at what of these projects do we have a non-federal sponsor, which projects do we think we can actually find a federal interest, and we've brought that number down to about 160. Well over 100 of those are 3x3x3 compliant, which is good news. There's a small number, less than 10, that we're going to have to do waivers on because the situation that they're under, they can't get in under 3 years or $3 million. And then there's about 30 to 40 that are in the range of legacy projects where it was just too far along for us to bring the feasibility report under 3 years and $3 million. But we think we're making great progress on it. And the only thing I would say is we're doing a lot of this internal to the Corps. We're working with our interagency partners, but it's going to really take a team effort because there are a lot of decisions, as you know, that are outside our direct control. So we're working well with the interagency.
Thank you. It sounds like you are making good progress. Congratulations. I yield back.
Mr. Mullen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have really learned to value the Corps in my district, especially with our navigational channel that runs up, and we're able to have one of the largest inland water ports in the country because of the Corps and the navigational channel. And we understand the burden that is put on you with restraints as far as money being allotted to you through the budgets and through the idea that the repairs are in some critical needs. And I know the Corps would like to get them done, and so I appreciate the partnership that we've been able to work with the Corps. We don't always agree on everything, but I know that we definitely are trying to work together. And so, General, just to let you know that Colonel Pratt in Oklahoma has done a phenomenal job. Colonel T that preceded him did a phenomenal job too, and we appreciate their willingness to work with us. Ms. Darcy, we understand that the Corps is undergoing a rulemaking on water supply. Is that correct?
We are considering doing rulemaking on surplus water supply, yes.
I understand this has been going on for quite some time, so it's more than a consideration. You guys have been talking about it. We had your staff in my office actually last week. We had requested to meet with them, and quite frankly, we'd been trying to get this meeting for several months. In fact, a big part of even last year, just to find out exactly what that rulemaking is, because we understand that you guys are trying to redefine the pricing structure of the water and trying to identify if you have surplus water and what is best used, how you best use the surplus. Is that correct?
Yes, so the rulemaking that we're considering would establish what a reasonable price is for surplus water. Under the Flood Control Act and the Water Supply Act, we are required to set a reasonable cost for that, and currently we don't really have one. So we need to go out for public comment and
when is it that you plan on going out for public comment? Because if I understand, you guys have been meeting on this one particular topic for at least 8 months?
Yes, and quite honestly, it's been longer than that.
Okay, well, I was aware of it about 8 months ago.
But we're still under development within the agency, and I'm not certain about what the actual timeline for releasing a proposed rule on this would be.
Here's my concern about this, Ms. Darcy, is underneath the latest example of the waters of the U.S., the rulemaking, that we were assuming that was going to come out for public opinion too, and we thought the states would have some opinion in that. And what we did is we completely sidestepped the states. And there was no room. The rulemaking came out, and the states are sitting there having to deal with it, which I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the 10th Amendment, that is what gave the states the rights, the right to understand and even have first shot at regulating their state. And so by you guys sidestepping it, going right past them, well, how can we even trust that the rulemaking on this water pricing is even going to be taken into consideration? You've been meeting for over 8 months, and yet you still haven't brought it out for public opinion. In fact, most people aren't even aware of what's going on.
We have been meeting with stakeholders and those concerned. And
who have you met with? Because we've been trying to get a meeting with you for, like I said, 8 months, and you just came to my office last week, which I appreciate your staff doing, but I believe that probably was because of this hearing coming up.
We've been meeting for the last over a year with other stakeholders, including the state of North Dakota and others who have been interested in this issue. And any rulemaking that we do would be a proposed rulemaking, which would have at least a 90-day comment period for the states and other stakeholders.
Going back to the waters of the U.S., are you going to work with the states?
Yes, sir.
When are you planning on doing that? I mean, if the rulemaking is already out, at what point are you going to actually allow the states to have input on their own property?
It's a proposed rulemaking, and so there's a 90-day comment period for all stakeholders, including states.
Okay, real quick before I run out of time, on the existing permits on farmlands with the navigable waters, my concern is with the broad reach that you just took out of redefining some of the streams or non-streams that's going to be classified under the Clean Water Act, that farms are going to be caught up. And underneath the rulemaking, when I read it, I understand that it says existing permits aren't going to be affected. What about farmlands that are not currently having to get those permits?
Congressman, all of the existing exemptions for farming, silviculture, and ranching of the current Clean Water Act, those exemptions remain in place. In addition, we've done an interpretive rule with the Department of Agriculture and EPA stating about what additional farming practices would be exempt. Some of those farming practices have come into existence since the '72 Clean Water Act, so we list what those exemptions will continue to be.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Ms. Norton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Darcy and General Bostic. After a number of years, we finally passed Water Resources Development Act amidst a fair amount of self-congratulation, which I think was well deserved. But now we're down to the hard part when we meet head on the issue of funding in this bill. I have a couple of questions on a formerly contaminated site and for General Bostic, and another question. These are brief questions on the 17th Street levee. I very much appreciate, General Bostic, that after some concern in one of our communities about perchlorate contamination in the groundwater, that the Army Corps is going to dig a well to try to trace this contamination, that they somehow have picked a spot that is in a park that is partly maintained by the community with trees and other vegetation that the community itself has added. I understand that the Corps has not made a final decision on where to place this well, as much as the well is needed, considering the size and of the community, and the fact that there are 53 wells, I understand, located in the area, and some of them are in roads. The community is asking that this well be put in a roadbed or other appropriate location, and not in a park which, according to all of their experts, will never be able to be brought back to its present site if the well is put there. I'm asking you, General Bostic, if you would work with the community to find a mutually agreeable site for this well in Spring Valley, looking at roads and, for that matter, at other nearby locations.
Representative Norton, we have looked at this very closely. I'm happy to continue working with the community to try to find the most agreeable location based on the technical analysis that our experts have done. I'm informed that the ideal spot is this location on the island, the public island that you're talking about. Other locations are in people's front yards and backyards, but
well, obviously we don't want that. So that's why I said mutually agreeable.
Right. So
and all I'm asking is that you continue to work with the community. If you don't want it in someone's backyard or front yard, you surely don't want it in the front yard of the community itself.
Certainly.
In a park that it is maintained. Look, and I understand the technical difficulties. All I need is that back and forth with the community, because if the community sees a good faith effort and that's all that's there, I know the ideal site, but an ideal site doesn't necessarily make it the best site for all concerned. So I appreciate your commitment to continue to work with them. General Bostic, I wrote you personally a letter after working a great deal of time with the Corps before you began the latest evacuation in Spring Valley, because for the first time, and this community has been very tolerant, you understand that Spring Valley is a community of gorgeous homes and taxpayers who, because, frankly, of mistakes made by the Corps, have had their community built on without knowing that it was a contaminated site, and have been doing work there for almost 20 years. I appreciate how the Corps has cooperated with my office and with the community since this contamination was discovered, and since the Corps left twice and had to come back because the contamination was not cleaned up. Now they're to a really pivotal site. Across from the site is a home of a family that has 2 children, 1 and 5 years old. I asked if they could be temporarily relocated. You denied that. This family, I think, for reasons that perhaps are understandable, were so concerned that they have rented an apartment on their own. Now your office says it's going to take 6 months longer than planned. Imagine the community now hearing that there's more extensive debris across from their own home. And just last week alone, you found intact glass containers in large amounts at the American University Experiment Station. This family is paying rent now on top of a mortgage in order to protect their children. General Bostic, do you agree that children of this age, 1 and 5, are more susceptible to diseases, including toxins and from toxins and pollutants that may affect their brain and immune system at this developmental stage? Do you agree that that is a concern?
Representative, I'm always concerned about safety. I'm not a doctor, so I couldn't comment on whether they are more susceptible, but I will tell you that we are very concerned about safety. We've taken all the precautions, not only within the Corps, but in talking to other organizations to make sure what we're doing is safe, and we made the determination that we would not be able to support the request to relocate the family based on
General Bostic, would you, in light of the fact that the time has now been elongated, you found even more debris than you expected, would you take another look? Would you take another look at this matter?
I will take another look.
Thank you very much, General Bostic.
Okay. Ms. Capito.
Thank you. I want to thank you both for being here. I appreciate your service to the country. I know your areas of responsibility are very difficult. We've heard a lot of discussion about the Corps, along with the EPA, redefining or new regulations to define the waters of the United States. And this definition would expand those waters to regulations permitting under the Clean Water Act. The Corps' ability to consider applications for 404 permits right now is a huge issue in my state of West Virginia. The Huntington Corps does a great job, but they're really stretched. And my concern is that we have a professional staff and an experienced staff in West Virginia and around the country who are working hard to consider these permitting applications that we have right now. If you're expanding that definition, my concern is in your budget request, you're requesting flat funding of $200 million for the regulatory program. We have a huge backlog and a lot of waiting periods before we are able to satisfy or to obtain permits. How are you going to deal with this enlarged playing field, so to speak, of more 404 permits when already we see a lot of frustration with the backlog that currently exists? Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Congressman. The proposed rule will not be finalized for several months, so that the potential for the increase is a little bit of a ways away. However, within the regulatory program, we're going to have to look at what increased demands there will be if the rule goes final, and have to adjust as best we can within our limited budget.
So basically what you're saying is you haven't really accounted for that yet, for the expansion, because you know you're going to anticipate a greatly expanded application procedure, correct?
We anticipate an initial increase in some permit applications. However, we believe that the certainty that's going to result if this rule goes final will help us down the road, because people will know, the applicant will know what's jurisdictional and what's not, and what's going to need a permit and what's not. And right now there's so much uncertainty about that. That has created a great deal of increase.
Well, I guess I was speaking more about the ones that already know they're within the jurisdiction, and the backlog that we're seeing in the time that it takes to work these. And some of them are very, very difficult, obviously. So, I still think the permitting process is going to become much more bogged down in the future with this new expanded definition that you're trying to seek. Would you agree with that?
As I say, I think initially we may see some increase in the request for applications, but I think the long-term impact is going to be increased certainty, and the amount of waters that are currently covered are ones that are currently covered, but the certainty that this rule will provide will help us to. You're right. There's probably going to be an increase initially.
Well,
and we're
if
going
I
to have
could, speak to the certainty issue. I mean, we saw what's happened to the permit that was awarded and went through the procedure with the Corps with the spruce permit that was overturned. I don't think that's really leading us to much certainty in the area of the country where I live right now. What about in terms of what kind of considerations when you're putting forth the rule? We have obviously a lot of manufacturing, as we do across the country. We have SROC in Martinsburg who has voiced concerns, and I am concerned as well. Have you looked at, as you're expanding this definition, have you looked at all at what the job impact would be, the manufacturing job impacts would be? Is that part of the consideration when you're looking at this jurisdictional rule that you put forward?
Congressman, there was an economic analysis done considering what the administrative costs would be, as well as what the benefits would be of this rule.
So that would be the jobs that would cost to administer the rule, is that what you're saying? Or does it say even if certain folks are now going to be pulled into this with a lengthy and expensive process, what that's going to do to the manufacturing base, or what it could do to their ability to expand their manufacturing jobs? Is that a consideration?
I would have to I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay. General, just a quick question. We have a project in West Virginia with a coal company in the King Coal Highway, and the Corps worked very hard to try to work with the permitting issue there to try to do a public-private partnership, which would result in the construction of a very difficult piece of road while satisfying the definitions of the clean water permit with the Corps. Are you encouraging public-private partnerships through the Corps? I mean, we're in leaner times now. I think it makes a lot of sense. Is that an initiative the Corps is taking on?
Absolutely, Representative. In fact, this month I have a meeting with several prominent leaders in public-private partnership, both in government and civilian CEOs, that we're gathering together to try to determine how we can do this more within the Corps.
I would encourage that, and I would encourage this project, too, to be moved forward, because in southern West Virginia it's much needed. Thank you so much.
Mr. Sansford.
I thank you, and I thank you for what you do. I'm going to try and run very quickly through 5 questions in 5 minutes, so it'll be a little speedy here. First, just a checkup. As far as I know, the post-45 Charleston Harbor feasibility study is on budget and on time. Anything I need to know new from y'all's perspective on that one?
No, Congressman, other than it's one of our studies that we can look to as being compliant with our 3x3 process, which was referenced earlier, which is we've cut the time off this study. We've cut, I think, about $8 million off of it, so it's on track to go.
Good. There have been, I guess there was talk within the WRDA bill on authorization and still allowing for construction in some instances. I think it was touched on in the manager's amendment in WRDA, but it's still a little bit ambiguous, and I didn't know if you all were prepared to issue guidance on that particular front, wherein you're in that sort of interim time period and not quite sure what comes next.
I'm not sure of your question. Is it what is going to happen to projects between authorization and the passage of a WRDA bill? Well, currently, if a project is not authorized in WRDA, we can't budget for it for construction for proceeding. And as you know, in the House bill,
I guess what I'm getting at is if a project's been authorized but not yet appropriated, and if there are backup state funds, say, look, if you guys, we have a backup in terms of funding sources, is there any way we continue to move ahead in anticipation of appropriation?
yes, sir. If it's an authorized project, we can accept contributed funds, we can accept advanced funds, or accelerated funds from if we have a project cooperative agreement with the local sponsor.
I will follow back up with you because there's some level of ambiguity, at least being read through the tea leaves back home on some of that based on some of what's going on in Charleston, but I'm going to follow up with specific questions on that. On the 3x3, going back to what you mentioned just a moment ago, at times, though, EPA seemingly will still gum the works up. So it's good in theory, but at times in practice, I guess maybe that's why Charleston stands out as a project that's working on that front. Is there anything that can be done to further expedite that process when some federal agencies come up and maybe slow up what you guys are working on?
We're trying to, in part of the 3x3 as well as with other federal agencies, the earlier we can work with the other federal agencies in the project development process, the easier it's going to be, so that at the end of a study process, we're not confronted with problems or concerns that we didn't anticipate that may in some ways either slow it down or in some way derail the process. So we're trying to do that.
I will again come back with further questions on that because I'm trying to stay within my prescribed 5 minutes. 2 other quick questions. One is going back to macro. There's been some concern, I guess, for some time on cost-benefit analysis within the Corps and a belief that, costs are understated and benefits are overstated. I think that there was a Pentagon Inspector General report to that effect. There was a GAO report to that effect. Is there anything that you all would point to in terms of changing that process or anything, movement afoot within the Corps to further calibrate based on those 2 studies?
We don't have necessarily another study that we're looking at, but I would say we're looking at budgeting and how we budget as part of our overall process for civil works transformation. And within that analysis of how we budget, I think we'll find methods to become more efficient and effective in the BCR. But we don't have anything specifically we can tell you today.
I will follow up with additional questions. Here's my last one, though, in my 5 minutes, which is going back to what you just said on budgeting and better budgeting. As I understand, the Corps owns about 7 million acres. Whether I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I've been told. It's the 4th largest agency out there in terms of land holdings in the aggregate. One, is that true? But B, you know, and maybe that's not the right place to look. If you look at the overall numbers of the country, we have a 5% fiscal gap, which means for agencies, ultimately, there's a much bigger gap in getting to break even. If you were to point to the least efficient program that you administer or the biggest cost savings that you think could be found within the Corps, it would be what?
That's a tough one.
I think we'd have to come back to you on that. We tend to focus on the programs that are highest priority and spend a lot of time putting our energy and our money there. But we could come back to you on what we think might be one that we're probably not spending as much time on and not as effective to the good of the nation.
I would appreciate that. Thank you for the time.
Okay, Ms. Hahn. Turn your mic on.
Thank you, because I'm saying something nice about you.
You used up your time on that.
Yeah, I know, really. But thank you for your opening remarks about the harbor maintenance tax. And Assistant Secretary Darcy, thanks for being here. General Bostic. I do have a statement I'm going to put into the record about Compton Creek in Los Angeles, and I understand in this budget, this Compton Creek project will be fully funded. I just wanted to ask a couple of questions about the harbor maintenance tax. Just would like to know from your point of view why the administration is not advocating for full utilization of yearly receipts. We know that we're getting about 1.7 million in yearly receipts, and the president's requesting, 1.7 billion in yearly receipts, and the president's advocating just for 1 billion to be spent. So that's 700 million. Left on the table yearly. So just wanted to know from your perspective, why do you think we're still not putting forth the full utilization of the harbor maintenance tax?
Congresswoman, within the scope of what it is the Corps of Engineers budget is from the 1.7 billion that you referenced, within our $4.5 billion cap, 915 million from the fund is all that we are going to be able to use at this time.
I remember in one roundtable that we had where I asked you, if we fully utilized the receipts of the harbor maintenance tax, how long would it take to have all of our ports in this country fully dredged to their authorized level? And you actually threw out a figure of 5 years, which is, again, something we should look at in terms of how do we keep our ports competitive and maintain, and particularly with the Panama Canal coming online. I just believe this is one piece of our economy and job creation that is right there within our grasp, and I'm still going to continue to advocate for that. Let me ask you what the administration's view is on more equity for our ports. It was one of the things I've also tried to advocate for is a guaranteed minimum that would come back to each port. The ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles contribute about $263 million annually. We get back about $263,000. So what, I know we're obviously a donor port, and I believe in the seamless network of ports in this country. However, would like to see a little more equity as we go forward. I'd love to see a 10% guaranteed back to the ports where the tax is collected. What is the administration's view on more equity going forward?
Congressman, the Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, as you know, is an ad valorem tax on imports. and that money all goes into the overall operation and maintenance of the entire system. There are some ports don't need as much operation and maintenance or don't need as much maintenance dollars as others. And so it is the need nationwide that we have to look at in making the decisions on how that's going to be apportioned. And it is a donor-donee sort of similar situation like that.
But you look at the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, I like to call them America's port, since 44% of all the trade coming through this country comes through those ports. If you want to talk about projects of national significance, it's certainly the work done at those ports. So I still think that would be something we ought to aim towards. And I don't, sure, I'd like to see 50% go back to the ports where it was collected, but I know that's unrealistic. But something like a 10% minimum guarantee, I think would be important, particularly as the next question I'm going to ask, if we can work on an expanded use of the harbor maintenance tax, particularly for those ports who have already dredged to their authorized level. What is your view on using some of that money for expanded uses within the harbor?
Well, it's currently under law limited to just operation and maintenance in the water, no portside development or anything. And I think there are other programs within the federal government, things such as Tiger Grant program within the Department of Transportation that can be used for those kinds of additional enhancements to the port.
But again, that's another competitive process. Again, when we're already collecting the tax from these ports, and the ports that have already done their dredging, seems reasonable that they would be allowed to use this money for other uses within their ports. Of course, I'm advocating for the last mile as well. I think if we want to talk about why cargo is diverted from some of our ports, it's because of landside congestion and not necessarily what's going on within the harbor. How do you feel about that?
The current usage of the tax would, in order to expand the usage of the tax, would need to be legislative directed to us in order for that expansion to occur.
I mean, let's face it, the way we stay competitive in this country is for that cargo to come in and out of our ports as quickly, as efficiently, and as effectively as possible. That cargo needs to come off the ships on to the rail or trucks and to their intended destination quickly.
Mr. Napolitano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And being the last one, maybe I'll get in a few words here. Assistant Secretary Darcy and General Bostic, thank you so much for your appointees to the LA area in the last, 10 years that have been very active with the Corps. The Colonels Colleton, Toy, and Magnus, and their Deputy Van Dorf has been excellent to work with. We also want to say that we've been very happy that you're now looking at water conservation measures in the dams, which are critical to our Los Angeles area since the drought is really hitting us more than we thought it could for the last several years. Excuse me. And preparing for the sediment removal that will allow for the capture of more rain since we have very little in Southern California. I will note that our water agencies, the flood control districts, and the local leaders have been urging the Corps to take measures for many years. And now that you've adopted some emergency conservation measures in that general area of Los Angeles, we've picked up 22,000 acre-feet of water conserved. We should be doing more of this, and that's hopefully where we can lead to being able to have the Corps' mission include the water retention and the sediment removal from the dams to capture more, and maybe even raising of the levees and expediting the process by which we check the dams' leakage, et cetera. As you well know, we have Whittier Narrows that we've been working on for about 10 years. I'd like to have an idea of where the Corps is on the Whittier Narrows and the Santa Fe dams with contributed funds. If you remember, there had been a time where I have an agency that wanted to pay for a review, and there was no way to be able to get the Corps to accept that funding. So now that we have that ability, and it's the Contributed Funds Agreement for Water Conservation Feasibility Studies and more short-term water conservation deviations.
Well, Yeah, at the local level, there is agreement to study the water conservation for accelerated funds, and they're negotiating that now.
And when can we see some time frame so we have any idea? Because, you know, we have so very little water, so very little rain, that the more expeditiously we move towards being able to capture that, the better off we're going to be in addressing the drought in Southern California.
I'll follow up with the timing. I really don't have the details on that.
I'd really appreciate it. The other area is the RFPs for open bidding process to removal of those dams, of the sediments in the dam, particularly the Santa Fe Dam, because it's downstream, and if they are able to remove that sediment, they'll be able to capture more water in the dams where the water is more able to be stored. But will the sediment have enough value to pay for the removal? If it doesn't, then will the Corps be able to pay for that removal of the pile?
We'll finish the request for proposal. That'll be done in this month. But in terms of funding it, due to funding limitations, the sediment removal was not included in the 15 budget.
It is not included. So they won't happen then for this year or next year.
That's my understanding.
And in the meantime, we are not preparing our areas for the drought, or at least conserving that water. Is there a way we should be able to move up and expedite that process? And I know funding is an issue.
We can always look at methods for trying to accelerate the process. I think in the end, in this case, it's going to be a question of funding, and we've got to really go back and take a look at, once the RFP is completed, whether, in future years something could happen. And in the interim, I'd say we continue to work with the local sponsors, the local communities, to see what options we can develop together working forward.
Well, I'd look forward to sitting with you and maybe figuring out, because there are some local partners that are interested in helping in other areas, and this could be one of the things that they would be very helpful in being able to address the funding issue. And then there's an area where apparently the sediment is going to be able to get a buyer, if you will. We're not sure that RFP, I believe, is being developed by them, or actually submitted by them. They may have other folks submitting these RFPs, but by the same token, we don't know whether they are going to be able to have enough ability to have that sediment pay for itself. And there is the issue of an area that the Corps owns, that a particular area that develops all this aggregate, if you will, is willing to make a deal or wanting to sit down with the Corps to see if they can exchange these areas of helping each other by allowing them to mine that area and being able to help the sediment removal for use by them. And I'm not sure exactly. I'd have to sit down with you, if you don't mind, and go over this. And I think, Ellen, you know about that. How do we work with the entities that are willing to help find a solution, if you will, to address some of the issues that are inherent in that particular area?
I think in this day and age, we're all looking for different opportunities and different ways to think through solving these complex issues that we have. And if we've got willing partners that think they can purchase the sediment, use it for different reasons, and if there's a different type of funding mechanism that we could work with the Congress and gain the approval on, then we'd be open to suggestions on that.
But the approval has to come from Washington. It can't be at the local level, and that is also a big delay in getting that processed. Am I correct?
Well, if it's going to be an authorized project and using federal dollars, then it would involve the Congress and folks in Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to submit some of the questions in writing, and then we'll
Thank you,
continue.
Representative.
Thank you.
Secretary Darcy, I wanted to follow through here on a couple of things. So first is when dealing with the rule, the Supreme Court decisions on the navigable waters of the United States or waters of the United States, it was quite clear in the Rampanos that the federal jurisdiction is limited under the Clean Water Act, and essentially the Supreme Court said that you need to pull back. And in your exchange with Congressman Meadows, talk about clarity. It's more muddier than it's ever been. Your answers didn't do that, and I would also imply on you that the Corps, we have budget constraints and budget realities, and we're trying to figure that out. And I know my ranking member commented about the budget restraints and all the other members, but I know the two generals sitting next to you there and behind you are probably a little nervous because they don't need any more work to do. And my question is on this regard, it's implied that the federal government has to move into these other areas because the states aren't doing it, and that's kind of the implied that I'm getting from that is because last Congress, when we had state EPA directors in here, we heard so much about how frustrated they are, and they're from both sides of the aisle, about the overreach of this administration and this EPA. And so your ability to not answer Congressman Meadows about what waters would be relinquished of federal jurisdiction in regard to the court order, basically, I got really concerns about that. So can you quickly answer the question about what the states are doing and why the federal government thinks they have to get more involved in these other waters? Because to me it looks like a big power grab by the federal government.
Congressman, we are not extending the reach of the Clean Water Act to new waters outside of what is currently being required to have a permit.
But if you're going to define what significant nexus is, you have the ability to extend that by how you define what significant nexus is.
The significant nexus determination would need to be made on a case-by-case basis on other waters, and that significant nexus determination, as well as what other waters would be covered by the Clean Water Act, is part of what the proposed rule is asking for public input on and public comment.
Well, to me, anyways, on this issue, it's becoming less clear that way we're moving. So that's my word of caution on that. I want to move on to another area. We have an issue, and hopefully you're aware of it, up in the Cleveland, Ohio, in the dredging of the harbor port there. There's in the omnibus appropriation bill, Congress appropriated $7.8 million to get the dredging done. Dredging scheduled to be done here in a month or so. It's very important that it gets done. We have one large steel company that is bringing in lighter loads of iron ore, and they won't be able to get enough supply in there, and there's a possibility of them to shut down their operations, and nearly 2,000 jobs will be idled. And I guess my question is, we're having a little back and forth with the Ohio EPA and the Corps, and the dredging that occurs there every year, it's gone in the CFF, the landfill, because it's got heavy metals, PCBs, or things that you don't really want to put out in the lake, apparently. My first question is, why did the Corps only bid open lake disposal when they should have known that it's highly likely that they won't get the 401 certification from the Ohio EPA?
Congressman, we have requested, as you say, the 401 water certification from the Ohio EPA. We have, in other places within the state of Ohio and in Lake Erie, we have done open water disposal. For Toledo.
Yes, Toledo, but I don't believe that out there is more of a phosphorus issue, nutrient issue. I don't think Cuyahoga River, the river that caught on fire 4 times years ago, there's apparently issues with the PCBs and heavy metals. And I think the issue that I'm hearing, the discrepancy between the two agencies is the protocol that was used in the sampling. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is dredging has to happen, okay? And the two agencies have to figure out what's best. Now, we know there's at least a year of capacity in the CFF, the landfill. And then also the Port of Cleveland has spent $4 million to work on another disposal site. And I guess, under the Section 217 authority, and, by the Corps moving forward with open lake disposal proposal, are they automatically, saying no to the moving forward with the other disposal area for when we get past this next year?
Chairman, we've got our experts meeting with the experts in Cleveland now, in fact, today. And we believe there's a real science to this, and our scientists have looked at this, and what we'd like to do is collaborate with the team in Cleveland, and we'd like to come to some mutual consensus. We know we have to dredge. We know we're funded for that, and we know the impacts if we don't. But we would like to understand the differences of opinion and then try to find a solution to resolve it. But as you say, if we're coming to a point where we have to make a decision because we're running out of time on these confined disposal facilities. And as you say, within a year or more, we will not have any room. So this decision
Well,
is coming.
what's going on with the other site where the Port Authority has spent $4 million to, I think, develop another site under 217 Authority? Do you know the status of that?
I'm not aware of the details on that, but
Okay.
I'll take a look into it. But
Because I think everybody's trying to move forward, and we have to move forward, and but we want to also be careful we protect the lake out there. The other area that I just don't really understand either, we're dredging 5 feet of sediment out every year, at least 5 feet, and is there anybody or looking at how all that sediment, that seems like a lot of sediment getting into the harbor there, is to mitigate the flow of sediment, or is it just the shoreline itself collapsing in? I mean that seems like a lot of sediment, and then still be heavy with hazardous materials. It seems like to me that there ought to be some other mitigation efforts, and I'm puzzled. I'm a little bit puzzled by that.
I can't talk to the amount of sediment, but in terms of the quality of the sediment, from our perspective, and I know we're in disagreement with some on this, but 80% of it we feel is clean enough to put in open water. So I can have our guys look at why there is continued sediment, but we've been at this for about 3 decades now, and in that area put in about $1 billion worth of money in confined disposal facilities, and we're at the point where we must make a decision. And in view of that, I think we're going to continue to work with the locals and find. I'm sure we can find a solution that will move us forward in the right way.
Well, I just want to impress on you that the importance that dredging stays on schedule, and we need to get this worked out with the Ohio EPA, and also protect our vital resources there in northern Ohio. My time's up. I just want to make a couple other quick comments since we're just the only ones here. The permit revocation, the spruce mine issue, 404 permits. Have we seen an increase of 404 permits, applications? Have we seen, what's the status? What's going on with that?
Are you asking about 404 permits regarding surface mining? Or 404 permits
in
overall?
general, because I'm a little nervous, but I'm disappointed that the U.S. Supreme Court didn't take this up, because I think it sets a bad precedence, because my understanding, the permit, was revoked, not vetoed. The EPA has authority to veto permits during the process, but they revoked the permit 3 years after it was approved, after the entities, invested hundreds of millions of dollars to start the operation up. That sends a bad precedence about certainty. And so I'm very concerned about that. And if that's why I think the Supreme Court should have took it up. And so now, telling what the status is on this permitting process, Congress might have to take it up. But I guess I'm asking is, what the status is of 404 permits. Have we seen more, less, and how many are pending?
I'd have to get back to you on that, but do you want, like, in the last year or two, or kinds of permits, or just a 404 overall? We can get you that information.
Well, we'll talk about that, but I'm really concerned about that, because it's. I'm also concerned that people might not even be applying. It's stifling economic activity, because the uncertainty of being shut down, even though they weren't in violation of their permit. And as I recall from our previous hearings last Congress, the State of West Virginia, EPA, and I think even the Corps themselves said that they weren't in violation of the permit, so it was more of a political agenda. So, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple of things with respect to the Clean Water Act and the proposed rule. First off, I think think words matter, and I think accuracy matters. Several of our colleagues have spoken today about the rule expanding the definition of waters covered under the Clean Water Act. Is it not more correct to say that what the rule seeks to do is clarify the definition of waters under the Clean Water Act?
That's correct.
Okay. And the way this process is working is standard, is it not? I mean, putting out a proposed rule and having a 90-day public comment period and then incorporating those comments into a final rule. That's how executive branch agencies conduct their business. Is that not correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, Mr. Meadows asked some questions regarding which waters previously covered by the Clean Water Act would not be covered once the proposed rule is finalized. And isn't it more correct to recognize that at this point there's no way of knowing the answer to that question until the rule is finalized?
That's correct.
Okay. So this is not a power grab. This is not the federal government expanding its reach. This is the federal government responding to a Supreme Court ruling which instructed the appropriate agencies to clarify which waters would be covered and which would not be. Is that correct?
That's correct. Via rulemaking was
okay. So what I guess I would hope is that we would let the process work its way out and that all of us will withhold our judgments with respect to whether the proposed rule and if it becomes a final rule, whether that's good or bad, whether it expands or contracts. We should withhold our judgment until this process has worked its way through. Is that?
We're hoping the process will get us to there.
Okay. Could you just talk to us a little bit about how you see the process going forward? I mean, you're going to be assembling, I would imagine, an enormous number of comments.
We will be. We'll also be doing some outreach with locals and stakeholders as to what their reaction. You know, the public comment period is as we said, 90 days. Anyone can comment on the rule via either websites.
Okay. Mr. Mullen raised some, I thought, legitimate concerns about the extent to which states will be involved. States will be involved, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back. Thank you very much.
Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and just following up a little bit on some of your questions, and I really appreciate you again, both of you being here today. I have concerns too, like many have raised, in regards to the Clean Water Act and how your final rule is going to define navigable waterways. I have tremendous concerns, especially in light of the fact that it seems that in one instance, the D.C. Court of Appeals has allowed the EPA to basically veto one of your already existing 404 permits. And they retroactively vetoed that permit. What if any guidelines or agreements exist right now between the Corps and the EPA which would describe the circumstances or the criteria of when the EPA will veto a Corps-issued 404 permit?
Under the Clean Water Act, the EPA has the authority under 404C, I believe it is. I don't have the right citation, to veto a Department of the Army permit with whatever just cause they feel is right for their perspective.
So the EPA...
that exists in current law.
Right. The EPA currently has veto power over existing 404 permits that you are permitting.
They do have that authority.
Okay. Throughout this process now that we've discussed at this committee, are you going to develop, in conjunction with the EPA, any guidelines of what would constitute the EPA's ability to come in and veto an existing permit that has gone through a review process?
The proposed rule, Congressman, does not address the veto authority of EPA. It addresses what waters will or will not be covered under.
Would the Corps of Engineers be open to an addendum to any rule that would allow some guidelines to be put forth so that the EPA cannot veto work that you're already doing?
we're always open to conversation and collaboration with our sister agency to make the process more efficient, and I think that's always something that we should be open to.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Obviously, you see a lot of concern from many members, both sides of the aisle, on how a navigable waterway is going to be defined. We have issues, and I just met back in a room with agricultural leaders who are in the livestock industry. They're concerned about issues that we're facing right here, talking about with you. These are concerns that aren't going to go away until the final rule is issued. And even then, I doubt that they go away. I doubt that we're still going to have some concerns about what the final definition is. So I'll move on. General Bostic, I have some time left. I wanted to get to Olmsted. Olmsted obviously is in my home state. I've toured the project in its infancy. Obviously, as you are, as many are, we're disappointed in the cost overruns and the continued delays. With that in mind, how much do you think the federal government's going to have to invest in rehabilitating Lock and Dam 52 and 53 because Olmsted has not come online to make them go offline?
Congressman, I don't have the exact figures on Lock and Dam 52 and 53. I do know that those are in very, very bad shape, very poor shape, which is why Olmsted is our top priority. We're about 60% complete on Olmsted, and the balance to complete for that is about $1 billion.
And there's $126 million in the president's budget for Olmsted, correct? Yeah, it is. I believe that's correct. Or $160 million, I apologize. $160 million is in the president's request, half from the Inland Waterway Trust Fund and half from the hardworking taxpayers of this country, too. With Olmsted, do you think that the public-private partnership language that is actually included in the House version of WRDA, where we authorize 15 projects that could address inland waterway issues, do you think finishing Olmsted could be an option through a public-private partnership?
Well, you know, I'm optimistic, so I think anything's possible if you put your mind to it and you've got the support of the people involved. That being said, we have a long way to go with public-private partnerships in the United States. I met with a group of CEOs, and one of them told me he's done 600 public-private partnerships. 5 of them have been in the United States. So there are a lot of things that we need to work on, both from a legal aspect, from a cultural aspect, from a profit aspect, in order to make public-private partnerships work. But they have been working in some small-scale efforts across the country. So I wouldn't count it out, but I think we've got a long way to go.
Well, I appreciate your optimism on that, and I agree with you that many countries that are not the United States still build infrastructure projects, and they don't have inland waterway trust funds. They don't have harbor maintenance trust funds. They use public-private partnerships to do that. And I want to continue to make sure that the Corps is willing to take into consideration new and innovative ways so that we can build our infrastructure. I mean, as somebody who represents the Mississippi River, I have a tremendous concern when 17 years ago we picked an option to upgrade our water infrastructure along the Mississippi and Illinois rivers, and we have yet to do so because we have projects like Olmsted that are still backlogged. So I hope we can work together in some new and innovative approaches to begin that process. And I also want to commend this committee for making some regulatory changes in WRDA that will hopefully speed up the regulatory process and save taxpayers billions and also get the Corps of Engineers to the point where we're building these projects rather than talking about them.
In fact, Congressman, this month I've got a panel of experts that are coming in, both academic and business leaders, including one of these CEOs that I mentioned, and the topic is on public-private partnerships. So we're looking for opportunities to do the financing in a way that we know that the government cannot pay the full bill for these projects.
Well, I appreciate your willingness to do so, and I I would ask that you keep in communication on the progress of those discussions on P3s. And I would ask you one last question. Do you anticipate rebuilding any other projects in the wet?
I really am not thinking about that at this time. I can't say that it would never happen again, but I think at the time some of the best minds that we had worked that and came up with that decision. So I've not gone back to question it, but currently I'm not thinking about it.
Well, I will ask it again the next time you're back, sir. Thank you very much for your time, and I yield back.
What was always amazing about that, when I got this job and I found out that the two locks were built in the dry and the dam couldn't be, it was built in the wet, it kind of blew me away when they talked about the seasonal 50 feet, but you guys were able to build the two 1,200-foot locks in the dry. So that's just an interesting thought that I had. And as you know, in WRDA, we do challenge the Corps to on a pilot project, anyways, to find some private-public partnerships and try to develop that. Again, thank you for coming in today. Thank you for the work that you do, and working together to enhance our global competitiveness and grow our economy and create jobs. And you play a key role in that. And so thank you very much. And this concludes our hearing today.
Congressman, with one indulgence, the Congressman has returned and he asked me a question that I didn't have the answer to, and I do now. So can I just tell
Go
you
ahead.
that the Chicago Sanitary Ship Canal O&M, once the barriers are completed, we estimate to be about $15 million a year.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. Thanks to both of you.
I was three short in my answer now. All right. Thank you.